Having fought his way through countless crocodiles, swamps, and creepy citizens, our hero has finally reached his foe. The humid air covers him in sweat, and he raises his sword for the final duel. And there before him, Florida Man stands ready. A living, breathing world for our characters to inhabit is paramount to your setting. Otherwise, the journey can fall flat. I'm author DC Fergerson, and this is the Worldbuilding Dojo. As always, before we get started, I just want to let you guys know that if you like the channel, throw the Master of Kung Fu and Friendship some love, and sign up for my newsletter. You'll get updates on what I'm working on in both books and with the channel, and every newsletter has some links to really cool authors you should know about. So, a big shout out to subscriber M1ZZ for suggesting this week's topic. Don't be shy. Always feel free to leave me a message in the comments telling me what you'd like to see covered in the Worldbuilding Dojo. What we're doing this week is revisiting the topic covered here, from back when I was a Wii YouTuber trying to find my voice. The reason that we're going to take a deep dive into this one in particular is because of how important it is to your world building. Why does this work and that doesn't? What makes a society compelling or interesting enough? Keep in mind, our characters will always be a product of their environment, whether they be good citizens of the established order, a part of that order, or the revolutionary trying to tear down that order. Your job is to figure out what that order is and make it cool. Yes, cool is a technical term here, and its opposite, uncool, is tantamount to saying the dreaded B word. Boring. Ooh. So, let's assume you've already watched this previous video on the basics, and let's talk about nuts and bolts, shall we? Crafting a fictional society requires a scalpel, not a hammer. Being blunt or obvious in your technique can come off as tone deaf, but we're going to expand on this. The first rule, and I say that in quotes because nothing is ever set in stone, but the first rule is reversals and substitutions on an existing idea is usually a bad thing because it's been played to death and it's not particularly creative. Like, what if a warrior society like 300 existed, but the Spartans are all female? Well, that's the Amazonians and Wonder Woman, so good luck beating that. Well, what if it's a political bloodbath like Game of Thrones, but religion was at the center of it? Well, that's medieval Italy, so, again, good luck. If we're just spinning one aspect of an established society on its head by altering its actors, we're not exploring our world-building potential. We're all fellow nerds here, so I'm going to assume you understand the butterfly effect, or the ripple effect. Understanding that actions have consequences and concerning ourselves with the ramifications of what that means is how we as storytellers grow and build our world. The truth of these societies we create is that they go on, even when they're not serving as the backdrop for our characters. This means that they need one of two things that makes them compelling. Longevity, meaning the strength of their society is to withstand the test of time, or fragility, meaning they're hanging on a thread. Take, for example, one series I've used 100 times, The Hunger Games. This, like many dystopian societies in book and film, exemplifies fragility. The reason for this is that they're using such a bafflingly amoral event such as the Hunger Games, which they've used to keep people in line and serve as a bread and circuses for the masses while they retain their power. There are known historical events that we can look to and look back on to see how that plays out. An elite ruling class that is so divorced from their starving people, well, let them eat cake. A dictatorial society that oppresses its own people to hold fast to power. Well, just look at half the failed states of the 20th century. Heck, the term bread and circuses refers to the concept of keeping the people placated while the Roman Empire collapsed under its own weight. So, the fragility of a society makes for compelling stories, for sure. The one person trying to save the system, the one person trying to destroy the system, and any combination in between. It can make for a very high-tension political intrigue or a tale of survival in the slums as the world falls apart. The strong society is equally as compelling, with many roots in history as you like too. When somebody talks about tales of knights and castles and fairy tales and kingdoms and so on, it's pretty easy to forget that one of the largest and most powerful countries in the world, the United Kingdom, is not only where many of these stories originated, but the nation has survived and adapted since their people were living in said castles and protected by the said knights. What does a strong society give us that a fragile one won't? Well, They can be steeped in tradition, with citizens and government as rigid or free as you want them to be. And for those of you that already have your gears turning, think on this. England has had great rulers, and they've had tyrants. They've had successful campaigns, taken territory. They've also been imperialistic and warmongering. The history of the UK is long, and it's a fascinating study of ups and downs, but at the end of the day, the crown remains to this day. That means that you have wild flexibility, because the nation, the society you create, will always rebound. It will continue and persist and be strong, even if that means transformation. The kind of society that you want is partially informed by what kind of setting and story you're going for. In the Dragon's Dream saga, the world is only 20 years removed from the biggest social upheaval in history. Magic returned to our world, and overnight, 3% of the world's population transformed back into the magical races they were descended from. Elves, trolls, dwarves, and so on. Wars erupted, powerful nations devolved into civil war, a new kind of racism seeped into previously homogenous cultures. So, the world of the Dragon's Dream saga is after these wars, as a society is starting to recover from the damage done and learn to accept that they have to live with this new normal. As a result, some societies are stronger, some are weaker, and this works very well with our lead character, who is a Native American magic user. The society that you create can be teetering on the edge of a cliff, or it could be the mountain itself. What is most important is how well it complements your setting. Now, let's step down a level and get into some deeper stuff. I'll stand by every word I said in our basics video on religion and politics. The guiding principles it introduces are fundamental, and I dare say even universal. The biggest sin I can think of, honestly, is looking back on a few thousand years of recorded human history and pretending your world didn't have any of either. Whether it was the sun, flying spaghetti monsters, polytheistic deities that sounded like a superhero team, or an all-seeing eye, humans have always looked for a creator and found one, even if by our own modern estimations they were mistaken. Politics is very much the same way, as any given set of ideals will meet resistance with a new age, new technology, new belief systems, and changing principles. Factions will line up on 2, 3, maybe even 20 different sides and duke it out for whatever it is they covet: power, control, the ability to shape their society, or just the singular pleasure of feeling that they were right. Remember, even the most loved, just, and righteous king has those that will speak ill in the shadows and plot against him. These two facets of society are not only inseparable, but also interlinked. How much does your world religion influence politics? How much power does the church have over the state, or vice versa? How much does politics and religion seep into the everyday life among its citizens? Is there more than one religion? What are the ramifications of their belief systems? Well, take for example a world where the gods regularly appear to people. We're talking about your classic Dungeons and Dragons kind of setting, where clerics can request magic and favor from the gods for dramatic spell effects. Let's face an ugly truth here. There's no room for an atheist in this kind of world. Figure even if a large city only contained even 5 or 6 of these clerics performing miracles, word spreads fast. Before long, it becomes a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon thing, where everyone has either had a miracle performed on them or witnessed one themselves. At that point, it's not a matter of whether there is a god, but which one do you follow? If you follow none at all, is that a handicap or is it true freedom? See, now we're getting into questions that your writing answers. And this is where the rubber hits the road in terms of world building and design, and will later inform your writing. Believe me, knowing what a given member of your society would typically view on certain religious and political beliefs makes giving them a distinct voice that much easier. Another wide open space that religion and politics creates for world buildings comes to your society's military. Are they a defensive force, securing the territories of your society, or are they an offensive force, conquering and increasing the size of the empire? What master do they serve? Are they like Templars, paladins of the church that fight by what they believe is divine work? Or are they a political weapon dedicated to the ideals of either nationalism or destroying the enemies of the state? Are soldiers drafted into the army or do they volunteer? For example, the Spartan army of legend had a system whereby their service was reserved for a sort of middle tier, with slave and agricultural tiers below them, but their service made them a citizen, and becoming a citizen of Sparta was an elite upper class made up of veterans and politicians. Now, if that sounds like the nuts and bolts are going to cause some crazy ripples, you ain't seen nothing yet. So far, we've discussed the top 2 layers of a given society. As we're building from the top down, we need to go deeper. So now we're at the level where we're not looking at systems so much anymore. Now we're looking at people. With a fantasy world, we're even more open to the possibility in this regard than the real world. Races that go beyond humans, such as elf, dwarf, fairy, and so on, go far beyond the constraints of the world that we know. Within those races is also more possibility with gender between male, female, and, let's say, asexual reproducers. Yeah, you future fantasy and sci-fi folks know exactly what I'm talking about. So, when we start talking about races and genders in our society, keep in mind, we're still using broad strokes here. Just because the mountain dwarves of the north despise or have nothing to do with the cave dwarves of the south, doesn't mean that your character at the individual level can't be the child of both peoples. So when I talk about relationships at this level, we're still making a generalized attitude of the majority of one group or another. With that said, let's talk about these relationships. How segregated is your society? What are their relationships like? Going back up a level, what are the specific races and gender roles in the political machine or the church? For example, in my first series, The Wicked Instruments, every race had a point of origin, or a home as it were, but the story primarily takes place in Kingsfield, the largest city on the island. Every different race, from humans to dwarves, needed to pass through Kingsfield on their way to anywhere else, or to just stay there and get rich or die trying. As such, this melting pot of a city made for an atmosphere where nothing really surprised anyone. Oh, that elf is going to live for a few thousand years, but she's got a thing for humans. She's on her 8th child with her 47th husband. This attitude permeates our group of protagonists when the story starts, where we have 3 humans, a halfling, and a dwarf. Later, we add in an elf and another human to the group. None of them seem to care about the race or gender of their fellow adventurers, which makes the blatant anti-halfling racism of the character Trixie so startling. All of this is done to comedic effect, with Trixie's attitude toward the halfling in their group making her stick out like a sore thumb. So here we're playing with the homogeny of this widely mixed culture to the point where racism not only comes off as ignorant, but it actually comes off as silly. If we start talking about race and gender role in our society, we need to consider for the majority, not the outliers. However, it's important to note that the outliers are compelling and interesting of themselves. Keep this in mind when you get down to the individual character level. Maybe your protagonist is the first woman elected to political office, or perhaps your hero is the only dwarf in a military unit for a human city. For me, in Project Phoenix, my protagonist is a Native American magic user for the NSA, raised in the United Northern States, which is still reeling from losing a civil war against her people. She's an outcast, yes, but at the same time her powers are highly coveted in a world where experienced magic users are basically living weapons. Race relations and gender roles can be a huge factor in the structure of your society, and again it informs the characters you create. Remember, our characters, hero and villain alike, are products of their world. Even if it may seem alien to us, their morality and beliefs are going to be shaped by what they know, not what we know. Still, there's one more layer that plays into a society we'd be crazy not to mention. So, you guys remember this video too, right? It is such a big topic that it needed its own video, and I could probably make an entire other video about this topic as well because there is so much open space in this category. The reason that we're talking about it now is because the effect of these two things on our society cannot be understated. When we're talking about creating a technology our culture has access to, the ripple effects can go far and wide, and it is crucial you understand those ramifications. Let's take, for example, the seemingly innocuous dermal regenerator from Star Trek. It has only one job. It closes and heals wounds on the skin. That seems harmless enough, right? I don't get it, DC. Where are you going with this? Well, guy who talks to your monitor, let's consider the darker ramifications of this tool. In a world where this device is commonplace and everybody has one sitting in their junk drawer, are children more reckless without having to live with the consequences of rough play? Do teens go through phases where they explore injuring themselves because they know the tool not only will save them, but wipe away any evidence? How does this change the attitude towards scars? What are its applications for torture? See, we can go to some dark, even creepy places without even the most seemingly harmless of technologies, and you can start to see how this world would impact the society in a big picture sense. Magic can be handled in much the same way. As I mentioned in that previous video, a society that has even a sparse supply of magical or faith healers, things like plagues never break out. The impact of war and the loss of life is less meaningful. Magic is such a dangerous and powerful tool. It can become your society's religion in and of itself. And magic has interplay with religion too. Where does the magic come from in your world? Was it given by the gods, or is it some powerful force within the planet itself that doesn't require belief to harness? What are the limits of this power? And is it at odds with the religious beliefs of your world? There are so many questions to ask when you create a fantasy magic or text system that you can quickly see why I could go on and on for several videos about it. I will warn from personal experience, you want to define the limits of your magic early in the world building, because its impact on your society needs to be measured and adjusted to fit with this puzzle piece in it. In the past, I've used the example of Green Lantern and his ring. The reason this character is so problematic from a world-building standpoint is that his power is basically a wish from a magic genie and only limited by his imagination. But by extension, his power is really limited by the imagination of the person writing him. That doesn't take into account the reader, who might be sitting there getting all big-brained and asking, well, why don't they do this or that? I prefer tight, confined spaces for my magic and tech where I can keep an eye on them and I know what they're up to. Trust me, as a writer, wrangling all these different aspects I've talked about is like herding cats, and the last thing that we want is to overcomplicate things by leaving them too open to interpretation. Define your boundaries. That's the important message here, folks. Fantasy societies are at the heart of world building. Even if that world isn't too different from our own, the slightest change can have massive ripple effects that make the final product completely alien to our dear old third rock from the sun. It's important to juggle these different aspects of your world building and look at the interplay between them. Making your world fleshed out will inform the characters you create. As a reminder, don't forget to click that link in my newsletter in the comments, and feel free to write back. I love hearing from fans and talking shop. Plus, you get to hear about all the cool latest goings-on with the Dragon's Dream saga. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe to hear about new videos, and as always, I'm DC Fergerson. Now have fun and get crafting.